the perfect setup for computer vision, or every company knows exactly which software to buy, and nobody got fired for buying VMware or something like that back in the virtualization days. We're not quite at that level of maturity. But what do you see as some of the most mature solutions in the AI space today?
Good one. I think if you're absolutely right. I think AI is in a very, very nascent stage, and I think it will remain that way for many years to come, right? Because of the nature of the beast, right? But the few I think have fairly well proven, that's laid the bedrock or good foundation for AI in the industry. Take, for example, the financial crime fraud detection space in the financial services world. Practically every financial services firm is operating on that. It's fairly mature. It's still maturing. It's continuing to grow, but you have a very proven track record there. You also have good solutions in the retail space. Today, you have very good understanding of customer behaviors, profiles, what products to upsell, cross-sell, what next best actions to take based on their behaviors, buying patterns, etc., all driven by AI, and that's influencing each one of our lives directly. Right? You also see a lot of action in the call center space. Right? There are a number of call center products, where natural language processing and also all the proactive and addressing of the customer needs, etc., is happening. So that's again another space which is quite well developed. If you see in the life sciences space, I would think in all the clinical process automation and in general process automation across industries, but even in complex areas like clinical process automation, etc., have been influenced very heavily by artificial intelligence. Right? And last but not least is the manufacturing, where you see asset management, being all powered by AI. You have a very good way of tracking assets, understanding asset conditions, failures, prevention of those, predicting those behaviors, etc. So you see I just picked up few that has come as the top of this thing that we have discussed before, but there are a number of other areas where it is fairly mature. But to your point, Dan, none of these are in a cookie cutter stage. Right? Yeah. They are all evolving. Right? They have been there for years, but they are still continuing to evolve.
Yeah, I think people forget that. I mean, AlexNet is really only 2008, right? And you look at a platform, for instance, like Spark, and its development started even before that, right? So it's the tools are just starting to come on that deal with this kind of whole new branch, right? And there are a number of parts of the stack that just don't quite fit, like a traditional development environment. Like there's no analog to training or a lot of the data ingestion phases and cleaning phases and labeling or synthetic data. You just generally don't see those kinds of things in traditional coding. And so the tools are still developing along the way. And you and I have talked about this a number of times. We've seen the big FANG companies and those companies kind of roll their own software, but it's just starting to mature. This from clinical engineering to drug discovery, right? And we've seen that in other parts of healthcare, we start to see breakthroughs, like you mentioned. Retail space certainly has been very advanced in this space for a long time. Who do you see though that needs the most development? Is kind of the furthest away from enterprise readiness, both from sort of a vertical standpoint, but also from a tooling standpoint? What do you think really is going to need a number of years to kind of catch up?
Okay. I think I would think that almost every industry has started on the AI journey for sure, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't think you can single out any industry as a laggard in the AI space today, and this is also kind of quite well corroborated by the fact that all product vendors are supporting multiple industries. But if you really look at where they are farthest away, I would think it's in the space of real applications of computer vision and natural language processing. The nature of these technologies are such that they are far away from truly understanding the human language, the way it's spoken and written, etc., and making sense out of it and generating meaningful responses to clients, etc. So that's the biggest application, and that's kind of way immature as we speak today. And likewise in computer vision, right? While everybody recognizes the need for computer vision in every area from asset management to pathology, etc., you don't see that you have the right kind of algorithm solutions in place. And even if they are there, you have to train those models, a lot of data sets, etc. So a huge amount of work to do in those spaces to take it from lab work to something which is enterprise scale that you can really trust and make decisions on, right? So that's one area. If you also, many of your real life interaction of AI is where it's important. So you have in the telecom industry, you have the 5G, which is picked up in a big way. You also need to do a lot of edge analytics, edge AI, because most of the intelligence has to happen on the edges, not on the edge devices, not in the central cloud server. Today, AI is all cloud centric, and that shift has to happen. So again, you see that's not really taken off in a real big way. Right? So you see some of these as the areas where things are very, very far away. If you really want to go to the farthest space, I think you can't talk about it without mentioning quantum machine learning, which is like probably 2 decades away from really happening there. But even in the areas where the technology is already available, like edge computing and other areas, we don't have the enterprise class adoption, enterprise class AI in place.
Yeah, it's interesting that you sort of mentioned the edge devices, because I saw an article the other day that was saying for the first time, the vast majority of smartphones, for instance, are going to have dedicated AI chips. So Apple's had one for a number of years, and it looks like the new Google Pixel 6 will have one. And that's really a shift to have these kind of dedicated processors to it. And that's only going to accelerate in the coming years. But you're right that the infrastructure at a number of levels isn't fully baked yet, both from the hardware level and the software level. And I think it's interesting you point out that there's not necessarily a specific laggard, right? Everybody's kind of developing, at the same time and trying to get their footing right in this space. But do you think that there are companies that are the most cutting edge? Like if you look at, you could probably pick a number of different companies, but are there any companies that come to mind that you think are doing some of the most cutting edge work in AI today, and why?
Yeah, I should qualify what I say with the fact that it's my personal opinion rather than a cognizant opinion, to be
sure,
fair.
Of course.
Right? So I would think all the hyperscalers, like the cloud vendors, are today leading the story on AI. Right? They're trying to dominate the AI space, right? So they are becoming the Facebooks and Twitters of the social media space, right? Of course, FB and Twitter are also AI companies, and they are dominating the landscape in one sense. The cloud vendors like Azure and AWS, GCP, etc. But I don't think it's just that, right? You see a lot of product vendors who are creating very proprietary solutions in spaces like financial crime, asset management, etc. And these product platforms are becoming highly intelligent, and they have deep insights to offer, and they are able to do predictive analytics. They are able to prescribe actions which would have taken weeks with traditional systems. They are able to do it in a matter of seconds, and they are able to do it in real time. So you see that shift. But I think the real players today, who are driving the innovation, or two kinds of companies. One is boutique firms, which are very focused on providing very, very cutting edge, narrow domain focused solutions in areas like computer vision, natural language processing, etc. So they are able to, like for example in London, in and around London, you have like in the Cambridge, image analytics centers that Cognizant is a part of, right? And I lead that initiative. We have a number of boutique firms which are taking very narrow problems around computer vision and others, like for example, identifying a defective nerve, right, among billions of nerves in the human brain, those kind of problems, and they're actually solving that, and they are actually the cutting edge ones. Then you have the infrastructure companies, right? I think the AI Infrastructure Alliance that you are leading, and glad to be part of that, right? If you see that, they understand need for building true, best-in-class AI platform, and they are addressing specific gaps, be it in the area of synthetic data, or labeling, or feature engineering, or version data controls, data monitoring and stuff. So there are a number of these problems, in the cloud platforms, or the gaps in the industry, that these AI infrastructure companies are really filling, right? So you have these different types of things. So to sum it up, you have the cloud vendors, you have the product vendors, and then the boutique firms which are very focused on computer vision, NLP, and all those technologies, solving very specific domain problems. And then the AI infrastructure alliance companies, which are taking some specific problems with the AI infrastructure, and solving those problems. So these are the ones who are driving the innovation, I see.
There's a lot to unpack there, and that's really awesome. I actually had an observation recently, and that I think you'll probably share, is I think we've reached this sort of tipping point, and it dawned on me the other day where I'm starting to see a number of companies whose entire business model comes from artificial intelligence, and in fact would not be able to exist without artificial intelligences. To me, that was a huge sort of turning point when I was thinking about it. And the company that I remember seeing a post on, I don't remember which the company it was, but I just remember seeing one of the founders post on it in LinkedIn, and it was just like a light bulb went off. It was doing generating models, photorealistic models for clothing catalogs. And what was interesting about it was that generally you go hire a number of different models, right? You might hire different body shapes and sizes, you might different ethnicities, whatever you want to kind of showcase, but you'd never be able to photograph all of those models across 5,000 sets of clothes. But now with artificial intelligence, you could say, great, I want this range of models. You're probably still going to hire a set of models for your hero shots, right? Your big kind of ads in the front page. But then if you want to show every piece of clothing on your catalog, on any type of body, any ethnicity, anybody who's coming to your site can visualize what it looks like. That's a total AI business model. And so I agree that there's a lot of innovation coming out from there, right? Where they're taking stuff and doing stuff you'd never be able to do without AI. And then the second part that you mentioned was sort of the AI infrastructure. And let's dive into that just a little bit more, right? And one of the things that the AI Infrastructure Alliance that we talk about is a lot of folks say, great, I just want this all in one solution. I see this with Cognizant, I see this with other SIs that I have this kind of privilege to talk to, where they initially the customer comes in and they go, I want the all-in-one solution that does everything, because they're used to a fully developed ecosystem, right? That's been in the works for 30, 40, 50 years and has matured so much that you can get a platform or two platforms or three platforms that's going to do pretty much everything you can imagine. Whereas my sense in the Artificial Intelligence Infrastructure Alliance, or the AIA for short, is that no matter what you buy today, even if you're buying Vertex or SageMaker or Databricks or whatever, they may do a huge chunk of what you want, but maybe they fall apart with unstructured data, or maybe they don't have a robust synthetic data platform, right? And you're going to need that specifically to augment your data set, or their labeling system is kind of rudimentary. What do you see as some of the pieces that are kind of really missing in kind of these all-in-one solutions? I always say that the all-in-one solutions only exist in the mind of marketers today, and not in reality. What do you think are some of the big areas that are sort of missing in kind of these all-in-one solutions that are important for people?
I think I think if you really look at take something like management of models, right, and data sets and APIs. We have talked about this before, right? There is no single central solution to manage these assets, right? So you have to manage them as separate entities, right? Whereas in AI world, data and the models and the function and the algorithms, the code which does the processing on the data, are all interrelated, and the feature sets are all interrelated. So you need to have a centralized way of managing that. You need to be able to trace back, the model output all the way to the models which produce them, and the data that led to that, and the features that manage that. So you don't have that centralized way of doing that. if you see other areas like areas like you're dealing with a lot of unstructured data, and today the structured data volumes versus unstructured data volumes, if you look at it, the unstructured data volumes are growing, and there are not any standard solutions out there which can actually provide the right kind of metadata, so you can search through these properly, and far less summarize what's there, create a knowledge graph out of it, or provide some insights, etc. So you have to custom develop a lot of these solutions. Okay. And even while DevOps, MLOps, data ops, etc. have all matured, we still don't have convergence of these tools. We still don't know what's the best bet. Every cloud vendor is trying to push that particular platform as a solution, right, as a way of doing things. But often clients are in a multi-cloud ecosystem, and they are also in a hybrid cloud ecosystem, so there are no universally acceptable solutions. Okay. So you have these problems, and also apart from this, there is also a big challenge, right? Who is the target audience for AI and ML solutions? Right? Traditional software, it used to be developers, engineers who were doing this. Whereas with AI, we are having to give the Lego bricks to the business and the data scientists so that they can actually build the solutions. So the kind of infrastructure support they need is far different. They need a lot more automation, a lot more low code, no code environments, click and play type of solutions. And I think the industry is as a whole far away from that, creating that kind of mature ecosystem for doing this things.
That's very interesting, and actually one of the big pushes now at Pachyderm, where I'm at is unstructured data, because we've sort of realized that that's been one of our gigantic sweet spots, and the vast majority of our customers fall into that. And when I started to look across the industry, I realized 80% of that data is unstructured in the enterprise, but 80% of the solutions are mostly around structured data. Why do you think team, and then they're trying to sort of bolt it on, right? And in a very unnatural way, for instance, we're sort of like shoving it into a database. And it's like, if you're gonna be on a special effects, if you're at a special effects company doing machine learning, right? I mean, there was the examples recently of Luke Skywalker, for instance, his face being done with a deep fake, right, in the latest Mandalorian, and they end up hiring the fellow to do it. You're not going to shove a gigantic high resolution video into a database table, right, and expect it to work. Or a high resolution satellite imagery that's 500 gigabytes for each individual satellite to do object recognition. Or I saw a company recently, Flawless AI, that was doing deep fakes for lip syncing, so that they would have a lip sync of the actor, and then they would also use style transfer so that it sounded like the original actor, so the mouth moves perfectly. Again, you're not going to shove that video into a database. Why do you think that so many companies have kind of struggled with unstructured data? Is it just that we've known how to deal with structured data for so long? In other words, we've had databases of very mature technologies at this point, and just we've never been able to process it? Or do you think there's something else at work that has caused companies to kind of struggle with unstructured data?
I think it's one is the culture. Culture eats everything for breakfast, right? So that's the fundamental thing. So basically, everybody is used to dealing with structured data. So the way we are still approaching, at least most enterprises are approaching the problem, is to treat it as a structured data problem. Even if there's unstructured data, they want to convert it into structured data and extract some insights and process it as structured data, right, at some point in the data chain. Right? That's this thing. But the reality is, as you mentioned, so you get terabytes of petabytes of unstructured data, whether it's videos or call center logs or records and others. And these cannot be structured fundamentally because they don't have a particular structure in the traditional relational or document sense or any of those, right? So they are not. And you need to start drawing the insights, right? And you need to have ways to kind of attack some metadata to it, have some version controls to this, and be able to run your agents, or AI agents, to kind of draw insights from this data and present it to the users, because nobody's going to look at this data anyways, right? If you don't have missions to look at them. And that's where the biggest struggle is, right? So they are getting around it by doing a few things. One is like convert all the unstructured data into files, just store them as files, and just search them and have some kind of a map around those files and manage them. Not very effective because you can't deal with data of that volume like that. Or buy some very expensive, data, databases for managing specific types of video formats or, speech and others, and search through that. Then what you're doing is you're taking some real life data, converting it into a format which a particular product can use, and manage that. So there's no natural way. I don't think, there's a simple, easy solution, right, of managing this, right? So I think, we have talked about Pachyderm. I think, how it manages the version control and other things for this, right? I think, I'm sure Pachyderm will also evolve as it goes. But one of the things is that it tries to kind of treat unstructured data in its natural form and use the underlying file systems and build some layers of intelligence around it, right? So you can actually, process that. So you need those kind of solutions. So why organizations struggle with that? Because, there are no real ways to solutions out there that are proven in the enterprise class to manage all this kind of unstructured data. And that's, as you said, like 80% of the data that's going to feed your ML model. So you need to have a mechanism to process them. That's, I guess, where the big challenge is, and where, a lot of thinking has to go in from an AI infrastructure point of view, because the data is and especially unstructured data is the fuel for all your machine learning models, right? So,
that's a good way to put it. The fuel and the food for all of it is data. Maybe let's dig in a little bit to kind of Cognizant and sort of some of the things your team is working on. When you look at the machine learning lifecycle, we've talked a lot about that. Where do your consulting teams and your kind of resident level engineers who are helping companies figure out their kind of machine learning infrastructure and their pipelining and their modeling and all that, where do you find yourself spending most of the time in the machine learning life cycle? Is it all over it, or is there few places you tend to focus even more than anything else?
Okay. So I think, it's a question of where do we spend the time? Where do we want to spend the time? Right?
Yeah, sure.
And
that's
how do I
that's
see
a good
right?
distinction,
So,
actually.
Yeah, that's a clear distinction. So, but I think where do I spend most of the time today? It's on the data, right? Getting the right data foundation, getting the right data pipeline setups, the end-to-end flow setup before we get actual solutions at an enterprise scale launched for our customers. Where do we want to be spending the time is get into their business problem and actually solve the business problem, right? Build the ML use case model straight away, right? And know that is enterprise class. Right? So the way I see this job, at least the way I would like to define this job is, freeing the data scientist from the clutter of data engineering, and AI infrastructure, right? Give them a proper AI infrastructure so that the data scientists and the business can actually work with, the real business problems and unlock the value. At the end of the day, AI has moved far away from the glamour it used to have, right? It's no longer about glamour, right? You don't do it for glamour. Now it's because you want to actually address, some top line issues, some bottom line issues. You want to address some real risks in the business. So you are actually using AI to solve some real problems and create the differentiation. Like you mentioned about companies which are purely cannot survive without AI, and that's going to be the state of the game for practically every organization. If they are not artificial intelligence, if there is not intelligence embedded across their processes, products, and all that, they cannot survive. And how do you do that? You cannot do it with one or two use cases, right? Or 10 or 20 use cases. You need to develop hundreds of use cases. Basically, you need to do it at scale across the entire enterprise. And for you to do that, you need to be able to develop it very fast, because you can't be spending, huge amounts of money experimenting with artificial intelligence. You need to be able to experiment very quickly, know that it works, and when it works, you are able to deploy that solution faster to the market. So we are trying to get to that point where we can create that enterprise scale, right? And creating the right kind of infrastructure for them so that they can actually have a factual approach towards generating, identifying AI use cases, implementing them at enterprise scale. That's where we need to go. And that's where our journey is today. right? Getting to that level of maturity.
So so that's interesting. So where you want to be and where you are, right? And it feels like that your teams tend to be, where I see a lot of teams dealing with the plumbing and the kind of unsexy part of it, right? The data engineering, if you will, threading the RBAC maze and pulling the data in and transforming and changing it and getting it out of various silos and getting it into people's hands. And what you want to be doing is solving the problems. And I think you're right. We're going to be there for a number of years. And that actually is interesting because you would put out an AI readiness pyramid that kind of shows the various stages of a team's maturity in AI, with the kind of bottom of the pyramid being just hiring a lone sort of data scientist with their laptop and poking around at a few problems and maybe trying to get a model in production, to fully automated with kind of all kinds of testing and alerting and able to put hundreds or thousands of models into production and understand what they're doing. Where are you finding most companies in that pyramid, right? Yeah. Where are they on that journey?
I think most of them, and I think the pyramid, if I remember my pyramid right, it's a 5-level pyramid, right? And most of them are in level 2, 3, right? Where they have defined processes, they have automated stuff, because that's something every other enterprise knows how to do it. And they have been doing this in the software engineering world, and they have just, replicated that, experience into the AI world. But where they are really struggling with is in monitoring the models and responding to these models, right? Most organizations, even today, see that when the models regress, they have to fire an alert to a data scientist, and then the model is taken off the production, and you have to deal with it, which means there's a downtime, or you need to have multiple models which can take their load extra. So they have to get to a point where you can achieve Six Sigma level availability for AI models, that models don't go down at any point in time, and if they do regress, you can actually respond back to it very, very quickly. I think they're trying to shift to that level of confidence, which business needs, right, to deploy AI models. And also the ability to go, very, very few are, at a point where they can actually take a model, explain it, know that it's behaving in an ethical way, and know that, you're able to, they can trace it back, create that kind of audit trails, and very, very confidently do that, and that level of confidence is required for mission critical applications, right? And, whether it is a transport solution or a manufacturing solution where, your mistakes could cost lives and huge impact on the business as well, or, it could be in life sciences and other areas where, errors could be very, very expensive, to fix, right? So those are the things, where we are trying, seeing the customers moving, right? So from basic automation to, getting that level of intelligence into how the machine learning models work, how the whole pipeline operates, etc. And that's where, we're trying to, move the needle, and that's not easy, right? Because each industry is very difficult. Each has got its own complexities, and we need to address those problems very, very unique way.
So if you've got life and death sort of decisions, at the core of your business, right? If you're driving a car, for instance, and then the car has to make decisions that could impact lives, or you're talking about healthcare, biosciences, and machine learning working on radiology images to make a prediction about skin cancer, lung cancer, or make a treatment recommendation, or searching for drug interactions. There are real stakes on there, and I've seen some very advanced companies kind of have a deep level of understanding of these things, but I'm not sure I've seen anybody who's fully at the peak of that pyramid, even in the most advanced teams. When I've sort of looked at some of the things that are out there, for instance, if you look at autonomous cars, the humans are not very good drivers. We like to believe that we are, but unfortunately, 1.2 million people die on the road every year, and 50 million people are injured. So I think when we get to the point where those AI systems are driving cars, and if it can even cut that in half, it's a massive breakthrough in terms of human lives saved. but I don't think that we're there yet. Even the most advanced companies, although they do have much more automated systems, they have feedback on what the cars when they're crashing. Google's Waymo is already running completely autonomous rides in a number of different cities, but it's still very controlled. Do you see any companies, and am I missing something? Do you see any companies that are at that level of maturity? And if not, or if you do, how did they get there? But if not, how does anybody get there? Is it just their process? Is it just time going by? Is it the maturity of the tools over the next couple of years in addition to the processes? Is there any way to get there today? Or do we think that it's something for you need
I
to
think
get there in the next few years?
most are
Okay.
not that done, right? If you take, for example, something like accident management, right? Accidents are one of the biggest killers, and they practically kill more than practically any disease and maim more people than any disease does. And practically everybody has to drive, and which puts them all at risk, really, right? So it's not even a choice. So it's, do we have robust solutions? They are evolving, but I don't think you have something completely reliable. Right, you still don't have a point where you can say there are no more accidents on the road and all that this thing, right? So zero accidents, or even 50% of what's happening today is far away from what we can achieve today. But if you see, and I think that's true for the transport, not just for the transport sector, for the manufacturing segment, life sciences and all that, we don't have that level of robustness. But are we completely in the dark? I don't think so, because there are things we can learn from financial services. While the financial service impact will be high, people do take risks, right? If you take the financial services world, I think there are major investment banks and others. They have deployed financial crime fraud solutions, and they're able to detect fraud in real time, and have models which can understand the customer behavior and have multiple models work in parallel to take different decisions and compare decisions in real time and arrive at a consensus, right? So they're able to evolve consensus and take kind of decide what actions to take certain prescriptions and so on. Right? So you see that happen. Right? So I think that's a principle that can be applied. Right? As edge analytics grows and edge AI grows, we will be able to take multiple models which can actually make decisions on the road, make decisions on the manufacturing shop floor, in the life sciences space, etc., and compare notes. Right. So you have that a principle at least that we can take and apply in other industries, right? Because we have tried it out in the financial services space, and we can extrapolate that, right? But I think how do you get there? And I think it's not just about the process and technology, right? It's about understanding the domain, the implications of the problem, right, and creating very custom solutions, right, that will address the domain specific problem, right? Which is where I believe you cannot have general off the shelf solutions and hope that you will be able to solve your industry specific problems. While you have the general off the shelf solutions to accelerate your journey, get there quickly, you need some very custom solution to address your specific problems. So that's what we are basically seeing with our clients, and that's what we are also advising our clients. And I think many of the clients are aware, that this is a journey they have to take with the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years probably, right, to get to a point where they have that level of maturity, right? So it's about solving very, very locally, right, for a particular industry, particular organization based on their context. Right?
That makes a lot of sense. And what do you think is the biggest challenge for a team trying to get to that sort of level of maturity, but also really just what do you see as the biggest challenge for building an effective AI/ML team today? Like, where are you seeing those challenges?
I think two things, right? So firstly, the nature of the team in AI/ML is very, very cross-skilled, right? So you need to have business domain experts, data scientists, data engineers, ML engineers, all working together. So they all come from different backgrounds, they have different perspectives. So you need to kind of create a common language, right? We could all be speaking in German, French, English, and Italian in the room, and it's almost like that, right? So it's kind of getting that level of commonality. I think the other problem is we are still not at a stage of maturity where the common plumbing thing work, the common automation technology, etc., has been matured enough, right? So that we can go get off to actually doing things very fast. We still have to spend a lot of time in plumbing. We still have to spend a lot of time in creating a proper data modernization platform. Right? So there are a lot of effort that needs to go into this. These are some of the blockers that we have to remove. I think the biggest challenge, if you ask me, is probably the talent space, right? To be able to build the solutions, you need to understand the domain, you need to understand AML techniques and be able to apply them. And that level of talent is very, very scarce in the market. And building the talent pool is the most important problem for almost any organization today. Yeah, and these are like expensive resources, to be honest.
Yeah, the talent pool, right? It's just, I mean, I think the biggest challenge in this space is that for a number of years, it didn't work. And when you looked at the kind of universities, they were basically saying, don't worry about machine learning. It doesn't work, right? You don't bother studying it. And there was a very small group of people who kind of kept the research and the torch alive for a period of time. And now you've got this kind of rush as we reached a level where the data sets were there and processing power was there, the algorithms matured, and all of a sudden, now you have this kind of rush of hiring all the people who'd been
talent from.
Yeah, right. And now they're kind of filled the pool in the same way as like if you if you lose a bunch of doctors and nurses, it's very hard to get them back into the pipeline, right? Because it's 4 to 8 years of time. And so I think the same is sort of true here. And that's we're going to be facing that for a number of years because I don't think there's any industry that's not going to be touched by AI. So I think we're going to need a lot of folks in that space. Let's maybe like switch slight gears and then see if we can kind of race to the end here. I don't think we'll get through sort of everything you and I kind of plan to talk about because you and I could talk for a decade on this stuff. It's just, I think, infinitely fascinating to both of us, and it's exciting to be in this. But let's talk about a few things. Like, do you see regulation and legislation having a big impact on the industry? And there's a number of kind of talks about regulating things and a lot of proposals, for instance, in the EU and other places. Do you see it having an impact, or do you see that it needing to kind of happen at an individual company level, or do you see kind of an interplay between sort of regulation and in the different companies, and how do you see that playing out over the next 10 years?
I think regulation will have a huge impact, and it already does, right? So basically you need to you need to decide who is responsible really at the end of the day when A makes the decision. Often you don't understand why A takes a particular decision, why it recommends a particular action to be taken. And in cases where we empower the AI to take the action itself, who is really responsible? Is it the CFO, CRO of an organization, or is it the software company which developed the AI models and solutions? So that's the question, right? So it's still at a stage of being a decision support system. Let's say you are, managing a network trail or some kind of an infrastructure like that, right? Let's say AI prescribes an action. The field engineer says that, some other action, which is guided more by the standards that he or she is used to, is something, something they can trust better, right? Now, what do? Do they rely on AI or do they rely on the standards, right? The regulation will dictate that they rely on the standards. Okay? So there's a lot of work to do to shift that, to bring that confidence. For that to happen, there has to be an increased confidence in AI, increased robustness in the AI solutions, and a lot of testing and proving of the solutions in real world scenarios for this to be fully adopted. Okay? And also the ethical side of things, right? So how do you create the right kind of technology solutions to make sure AI behaves ethically, right? And it is not violating any local laws of equality and other aspects, right? That you put organizations in at risk, right? So creating that kind of infrastructure, the compliance infrastructure, is important for AI to be meaningfully applied in enterprise grade, right? So that's a big area. So yeah, to answer that in a short way, yes, regulations are going to be very important, and that's going to create a lot of local variations on every single AI solution that we got.
The local variance is going to be challenging. Like, can you use the output of these algorithms in this jurisdiction, and it's going to be very geolocated. Some places are going to be very forward. I can even see companies, skipping around legislations by taking it to another country to train it and taking the output there. So it's going to have to be a very global understanding, and it's going to be a push-pull over many, many years for society to come to terms with this in a proper way. And it's going to be a challenge for it. But thinking about kind of the future a bit, and then kind of helping us get to the final points of our conversation. I always like to talk about the future and where things are going, because it's very exciting to talk about where we are now, but it's important to kind of keep our eyes on the horizon to know where things are going. And you and I have talked a lot about a canonical stack for artificial intelligence, right? It's a lot of the work of the AI Infrastructure Alliance, but a canonical stack, the example I always use is something like a LAMP stack for web development, where you have a mean stack or a LAMP stack, and then all of a sudden it's mature enough that it becomes kind of the default set of solutions, and that you have all these other applications that can be built on top of it. So you don't have something like WordPress until you have the LAMP stack, and then WordPress doesn't become 50% of the small websites out there until you've reached a certain level of maturity, and then you get higher order problems being solved. I think both you and I agree that we're sort of a bit away from a kind of canonical stack, saying like these are the definitive solutions for solving even particular use cases, but certainly not all use cases in machine learning. How long do you think that it's going to take us to get there? How long is it going to take for a stack to develop? And in your mind, like, what would it look like? How will we recognize it when it's here?
Yeah, like with what happens with LAMP, mean, and others, right? So it will be multiple variations of the stack. There won't be a single stack, as you rightly called out, and there'll be multiple stacks, and these will be dependent on the industry, the kind of problem you're trying to solve, and you'll be looking at some common elements, things like the ops, like the store ops, the data ops, DevOps, ML ops, and the FinOps side of things, where you can actually run the process in a more automated way, more cost-efficient way, and in a more agile way. That's going to be part of practically every stack solution. And then you need to have the data engineering, components, which are responsible for all the ingestion, wrangling, transformation, storage, in-memory management, etc. So you need to create that foundation, data foundation, which again, I think is common, but then you need to start thinking about, what are the types of data we need to deal with for different types of industries, and the volumes of data, and how do we create the right kind of data stack, that you can say is fit for that particular industry's purpose, with predefined models that go with it. So you don't need to start from scratch for building any of these models. So that's the foundation. So I think that will take a few years to achieve. I think people have tried this, for some time, and I think it's not easy to solve, and it will take some time for us to get to a point where it is mature enough, it's acceptable enough. But even if you are able to reach 50-60% of maturity in this, it's going to be a great accelerator for most businesses, because today they have to start from scratch in setting up a platform. They have to take their traditional data lakes and data warehouses and transform them into modern data platforms fit for AI. Then you need to think in terms of the model pipelines itself. So you have the model pipeline management. You need to think in terms of what are the tools for model management, deployment of the models, tracking the model's performance while it's in production. And the key problem of AI, which is that the models will not behave as expected, and you need to be able to regress. You need to kind of anticipate regression of the models or drifts and respond to the drift in a very effective manner without impacting the service availability itself. Right? I think that's the biggest challenge to deal with. So all the monitoring capabilities need to be added to that. Right? And then you need to tie this monitoring all the way back to your data sets and feature sets, right? And the feature engineering to support those, etc. And create a graph of what really happened, and create the audit trail so that you can justify why, to any auditor or any third, regulatory body that we talked about earlier. How do you actually prove it? So these things would take, I think, it's all evolving. I think there are bits and pieces of the solution in place. I think we can pull something together today with a lot of effort, right? But for you to have something which you can fully trust, is fully proven, and it's allowing us to do not few tens of use cases, but hundreds of use cases, because you're talking about scale, enterprise scale of AI, not just a small set of AI experiments or a few tens of use cases. We're talking about scale, and for us to get to that level of maturity, I think we are at least 2-3 years away.
Yeah, I agree, and maybe even longer. I think one of the hardest parts of being a futurist is getting the exact timing right. It's like you can figure out what's going to happen, but I always find out, for instance, tend to be either a little too quick or think it'll take too long, and it always sort of surprises me a bit. So I've kind of started
it's always aspirational. You try to be quick, and then you realize that life happens and it takes longer than what it should, right? So yeah, that's true.
Yeah, like I had this picture a long time ago that robotics, for instance, would be one of the first areas that AI would really have a huge impact. But now that AI has really started to mature more,